Okay. This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Robert A. Coane, Dennisport, Mass.
Okay. When did you decide to move to Cape Cod?
It was in 1982. We moved from New Jersey to Cape Cod.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in a town in New Jersey called North Arlington, and the name of the high school was Queen of Peace High School.
Did you have a job or career before joining the service?
No, it was part-time summer jobs, but no career, no, right out of high school.
What inspired you to join the service?
Honestly, I think it was, I wanted to join some branch of the service, and I wasn't quite sure, but I was actually leaning towards the Navy. My father was in the Navy, and it seemed like the right idea at the time. I had just graduated high school, and at that time, I don't want to get too much in depth and more respond to your questions, but the draft was getting hot and heavy, and it was difficult to get a job right out of high school. I had no intention of going to college at that time. So I wanted to get a job, though. Any employer was very reluctant to hire because you could be drafted. And not going to college, I would have had a very high draft number. So they weren't going to train you for a job and then have you possibly leave for 4 years. So I decided I'd better join and get it out of the way, you might say.
What year did you enlist?
1962.
How did you choose the branch you were in?
Ultimately, I wound up going into the United States Air Force. And that was kind of funny because a good friend of mine and myself went to the recruiting office one day to get some information. We both had pretty much thought about going into the Navy. At the recruiting office, the 4 branches, Marines, Navy, Air Force, and Army, all in the same building, all on the same floor. In fact, all in the same big office. So we could get information from everyone. We did. We spoke to every recruiter and left after about 2 hours with little talk with each one, and proceeded home and to digest the information we got. And it was pretty much a foregone conclusion. We were going in to join the Navy. Make it a long story pretty short. Within a couple of weeks, we decided we'd go back, tell the Navy recruiter we were about ready to sign the papers. And we got there, it was lunchtime. We didn't plan on it like that, it just happened. And we walked upstairs, it was above a post office where the offices were. And we walk in, and the only recruiter there was the Air Force recruiter. And we asked, well, where's the Navy? I remember the Navy recruiter's name was Chief Petty Officer Fry. I can remember those names very distinctly. Anyway, he said, well, Officer Fry's gone out to lunch with the recruiter from the Army and the Marines. It was a Friday, and they had lunches together. I mean, they were very friendly. So he said, well, they'll be back soon. Sit down and, relax. And he was very persuasive. Before we walked out of there, we had joined the Air Force. Long story short, all intention of joining the Navy, we wound up joining the Air Force because that was Staff Sergeant Lowell Thomas, the Air Force recruiter, again, never forget that name, said, well, talk to us. And it was so personal that we said, I think we'll sign up for the Air Force. Goes to show how easily we were manipulated, but it was good. It wound up being all good.
What was your training experience like?
It was good. It was a little bit harder than I thought. All the basic training took place in Texas at a base called Lackland Air Force Base. It's where all Air Force training is done, basic training. A lot of other schools down there too, but that's basic for everybody in the Air Force, still is. It was about 10 weeks of basic training, and it was tough. It was tough for a couple of reasons. One being that it was extremely hot in Texas. It was towards the end of July, beginning of August, and the temperatures were always over 100 degrees. Everybody says, they talk about it being a dry heat. It was dry, but it felt like an oven. I mean, that kind of dry. So it was hot and very, very dusty in that part of Texas. So I always felt that, we were just on the edge, and we were allowed to drink plenty of water and encouraged to do that. But training was pretty hard. I think most branches are. I can only speak for the Air Force, but it was harder than I thought it was. Probably the reason I didn't join the Marines or the Army or something was not to avoid that hard training, but it was much harder than I thought it would be.
Could you tell us a little bit about the different places you were stationed during your service?
Yep, from basic training in Texas. After 6 weeks, there was some advanced training in Mississippi, Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, and that's a big training base. It's right on the Gulf Coast. Beautiful area. That was about 13 weeks of advanced training there at that base, and then I was assigned to my first operational duty base, which was Proudest Air Force Base here on Cape Cod. A couple of years there, and then to a remote radar site in Alaska for a year. That was kind of isolated duty. And then back here to the States. Well, that was back here to the lower 48, as they refer to us in Texas, the lower 48, and I was assigned to a radar unit out on Long Island, Montauk Point. From there, I was discharged.
Let's start with, what was your job in the Air Force? What did you do?
I was a radar control operator, and that's my first duty was at Proudest Air Force Base, and that was an airborne early warning and control operator. We flew missions out over the Atlantic from Proudest, various points along the coast, about 200 miles off the coast, though, in the Atlantic. That was interesting. They were long missions. They were anywhere from 15 to 22, 23 hours on the plane, which was quite a long time. The plane was equipped with extra fuel tanks, big 4-engine. The nomenclature was an RC-121, affectionately called a Coane. They were constellations made by a company called Lockheed Aircraft. It was the same as the civilian version, which was a passenger plane, except it was gutted and jammed tight with electronic equipment. What we would do, we fly up and down on what they call a racetrack, just a small 20 miles up, 20 miles back down, and do that continuously. So we were sort of a station in the sky. And it was to pick up and detect planes coming in from Europe and what have you, and make sure they were all nice guys. And that was about it at Proudest. Similar duty at other stations, but that was the airborne portion of my thing. That was about 2 years.
Describe a normal day while you were doing your job.
Okay. When I was at Proudest, we had, when you were on flight status, which means if I was flying tomorrow, I would have been off today. So that would give me time to do anything I had to do. There was no real official duty the day before a flight. The day of the flight, depending upon what time, and the flights would leave around the clock, 24 hours a day, so it could be any time. But if it was 2 a.m., 2 o'clock in the morning flight. That previous day, the prior day when I was off, I probably would have tried to catch a little sleep, but it wouldn't have been too easy. There's always things you want to do, you know, go to the laundry, just mundane things, but things you just have to get done, write a letter. So about 11 o'clock that night, 11 p.m., we'd head over to the flight line. It's about 3 hours before the flight departure, which was just a 5-minute ride by truck. There you would, first thing you would do, you go to the chow hall and eat if you wanted to, and you'd also get things to bring on board to eat during the course of the flight. Could be cold, nice cold lunches with sandwiches and things. They fed us very well. And it could be hot dinners that you see, sort of microwavable things. Also, they were pretty good. About 2 hours before the flight, we'd have a briefing, and that would last about 45 minutes, entailing exactly where we were going, what we were going to do, who was going to do what, make sure everybody was on the same page. A crew consisted of between 18 and 22 members. That was the total crew, including the pilot, co-pilot, the whole plane. That was about 22 people. From there, we'd proceed to the aircraft and make sure everything was operating. Everybody had their job to do to ensure that things were working. And then, hopefully, right at 2 o'clock, we'd be taxiing down the runway to take off. If everything went right, we'd be gone for about 22 to 24 hours, like I said. If there was a problem, we might have to return earlier, either a mechanical problem with the plane itself or an electronic problem with the radar or what have you. Of course, we'd be home earlier, but it was scheduled for about 22 to 24 hours. That was the day. After that, you had another day off, so it wasn't too bad.
You were stationed throughout the U.S. During wartime. Could you describe the civilian perspective on the war?
That's interesting. That's a good question because I went into 1962, active duty to 1966, and then I was discharged in 68. So there was it was going through a change. 62, the war in Vietnam was kind of getting strong, hot and heavy. There seemed to be the sentiment was very patriotic. Most civilians were all in favor of us being involved in the war. They felt it was a good thing. So when I was at Otis, most of that time, that 2 years, 62 to 64, it seemed pretty good. The only thing is, to go back to preface that, when I was at training in Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, that was a funny situation down there because it had nothing to do with the war, but there was I was ill prepared for this, but there was this north-south thing that really was kind of surprising to me. I didn't realize how strongly, you might say, they felt about us so-called Yankees. And on base, no problem at all. Off base, though, because segregation was still a big part of the culture there, we in the service were told we had to abide sort of by the local customs and what have you. So if your roommate or best friend happened to be a Negro, black guy, you wouldn't leave base with him. You were not allowed to go off base together, even if it was your best friend. It was, like I said, segregation was a big part of that. And I felt kind of uncomfortable because something I had not, at 19 years old, really experienced. So it was kind of that was kind of tough. Outside of that, though, again, once we got to Otis here, back up in the North, things were different. And again, that's when Vietnam and the situation there started to play a little bit, play into things, you know. By '66, some of the sentiment in the United States had changed, and there was a big anti-war movement afoot. And we traveled, whenever we traveled out off bases or off radar sites or whatever, we were encouraged, to be honest with you, wear civilian clothes. We wanted to blend into the community. I don't think it was for fear of any kind of repercussion, but it was just part of it. When we traveled, though, we were traveled home or what have you on leaves. We were expected to be dressed in our Air Force uniforms, our Class A uniforms. And that was always good, too, because you always got big discounts. So you wanted to make sure you did that.
What was the hardest job you ever had to do in the service? Like one of your missions, what was the hardest one?
Honestly, it probably was one specific time over on a flight out of Otis. It was lousy weather when we left. It was winter time, and it was lousy weather. And we got out over the station we were assigned to, and it was just terrible, terrible, terrible flying weather. It was horrendous. You're trying to look at a radar scope, and you're bouncing around. The plane is bouncing around, and you really have to concentrate. You're looking for blips that indicate aircraft, and if you weren't right into it, you can miss something. So that plus the idea of bouncing around, it was kind of, it felt nauseous often. A lot of changes at the scopes. We had 2 or 3 radar scopes going and 2 or 3 airmen on them all the time. One misses it, somebody else picks it up, but that was lousy to begin with. And then we had to shut down an engine. There was the flight engineer up in the cockpit. You had a pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer. Flight engineer monitored the engines and every other mechanical part on that plane. That was his job. And it had a fire warning light, which means an engine's overheating, so they shut the engine down. It's a 4-engine plane, so we have 3 engines now. At that time, with the weather being what it was, we decided to head back to Otis, which was a good idea. We no sooner, we were about 200 miles out, and we no sooner made our exit off station, and another engine had to be shut down. So now we have 2 engines shut down. Fortunately, they were opposite sides of the plane, so the plane had 2 engines, one starboard and one on port side, and but that's limping, and you can't afford to shut another one down, so you kind of hold your breath. It was lousy trying to land the plane. It was a little underpowered at that, and I remember sitting where I was sitting, and I could see into the cockpit, and I could see us lining up with a runway, and all I remember was we were coming in on such an angle. Instead of being nose down the runway, it looked like we were almost wing down the runway. It was icy runway, and maybe that was a good thing, because we landed like that, and the pilot managed to get us straight, but I think we landed and slid. And I wonder if there wasn't ice there, if that plane would have slid as well, and slid long enough for the pilot to straighten us out. That was kind of hairy. That was hairy. That was a little bit, but it wasn't bad.
What was your proudest memory in the service?
Honestly, I just think after it was all said and done, was just to have served. I felt good about that. By the time we were discharged, there was a lot of anti-war sentiment, but I felt very proud to have served. It was just a feeling that I accomplished something, I did something right. It was a good feeling, and I think I'm there wasn't a specific moment, but I was proudest of just the whole idea of having been in the service for 4 years.
Okay. Now, saying that, when my brother Nathan came to you and told you he was going into the service, what was your reaction to that? What went through your mind?
I was happy that he had made the decision. It wasn't something spur of the moment for Nathan. He was, I think from the time I can remember, Nathan, he wanted to be a Marine, and he wound up joining the Marines, as you know, and I was thrilled that he took that branch of the service. He asked me about the Air Force. He asked me about whatever else I thought about, and I told him, Air Force is great, but you want to be a Marine, got to be a Marine. So he went and joined, and I was proud, very proud of Nathan.
What's your opinion on what the military is doing today?
I think the military does a great job. I think their military many times is put in very awkward situations. That's been happening for a long time. I think every man and woman in the service, I mean, it's an all-volunteer service we have now. They want to be there. They want to perform well. I think given the right tools, they do a hell of a good job. I just am very proud of the men and women in the armed forces. And just recently heard where just about everything now is going to be opened up to women if they choose to try out for some, select branch or select operation. They have an opportunity. I think that's a step in the right direction too. I really do. I think that's when I was in there. They weren't in the Air Force. They were in the Women's Air Corps. They were called WACs. They weren't Air Force personnel. They members of the United States Air Force were WACs, waves in the Navy. They weren't part of the U.S. Navy. They were waves, and so and the Women's Marine Corps too. But that has come a long way. The idea of women not only doing office and clerical work or nursing, which is very important, very, very important, all of those jobs, but now they could be on the front line. They want to be there. God bless them. They should have the opportunity.
What do you think about the president coming out and saying we're not going to put troops on the ground in Syria?
That's, I don't, myself, my opinion, I don't want to see large numbers of American forces on the ground. I think special operation forces, I think it's a war suited, a conflict, war suited for special operations. I think that's what they're really good at, this kind of warfare that we're fighting over there, this terrorist elements of this and that. I think large number of troops are not the way to go. I think we can hopefully rely on some other countries to put troops in. I think we should be part, but in a very selective way. I'm totally against that. I find too many politicians are too willing to send men and women into harm's way, and it might be easy to do that. I hate to sound like that, but it might be easy to do that when you're sitting behind a desk in Washington. You're not there. I don't think we need them there, and I think it almost would be an overreaction. So, special ops.
What type of friendships did you make while in the service?
Oh, a lot of good friends. Most of them I haven't stayed in contact with. This is 50 years ago, but at the time there were so many guys I met, guys from all over the country, and they were bonded very well. It was a good part of my life, being in the service and meeting new people and people with different ideas and different viewpoints, from people from around the country, different areas, and I enjoyed that. for many years after I got out, I had friends that we kept in contact with, but the years kind of they kind of go. You forget about that, and that's just the way it is. So.
How has serving affected your life today?
That's again a good question. I'm very happy that I served. I'm very pleased. During the time I was in the service, it's kind of funny. I did get married, and had in the total time active duty 4 years and 2 years inactive. I had my 2 children. My wife and I had 2 daughters, and so it was a transition time too. Besides just being in the service, I go from a 19-year-old to 23, 24-year-old, go in single, come out married, basically with 2 children. So the service was one part of it, but my life was evolving also. So it was new, exciting. Everything was new. It seemed new at the time. From having a child to going to different places in the service.
Now, did being in the service affect the family in any way?
No, not the family. It did affect my wife Ann. We were married about 11 days before I went to Alaska. We actually had planned on being married. I got orders between the time we planned on getting married and things were set up, and our families had made reservations for reception, and we were going to get married in the Catholic Church, so we had the church all set up. Then I get orders to go to Alaska prior to that date, so it was like, what do we do now? Do we postpone it all till I get back in a year, or do we get married now? We decided to get married before I left. So that was hard, I think, for Ann and me. But I mean, the wedding was wonderful, but then to leave about 11 days after we get married and not to see each other for slightly over a year, that was a difficult part. I didn't enjoy. I loved Alaska. I loved being there. I hated being away from Ann. So, and I'm sure anybody would feel the same way. But we didn't have children until I came home. So it was no children involved at that time, and that was good. And after Alaska, I was sent to out.
What was your most interesting memory from the service?
Interesting. Okay. That's hate to not. I'm just trying to really think. A couple things just come to mind. I liked. It was really great when we graduated from boot camp, basic training. That was exciting. It was over and done with, and finally we were going to do something other than, run around the grounds there and do PT. Going to the course for radar control, that was very interesting. It wasn't necessarily difficult, but it was just interesting, something I had never even known or thought about, or how things work like that. So I found that, but I think the most exciting part, if there was coming home from Alaska and seeing Ann, my wife, for the first time. I flew into Kennedy, and she was at the hotel there and waiting. Of course, that even was kind of odd, because the flight was from flew out of Alaska to Seattle, Washington. Seattle, Washington, United Airlines flight. There's all civilian commercial airline. United Airlines to Chicago and then on to Kennedy, which at that time I think was still called, it wasn't JFK, it was Idlewild Airport. Long story short, though, we were held up overnight in Chicago because of a snowstorm. So instead of getting to Kennedy today, I thought we'd get together, Ann and I. It was a day later. Made it all the more exciting.
Okay. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make or anything you'd like to share with the viewers?
I'm happy I served in the United States Air Force. I made a good decision there. I'm not sure what the Navy would have been like. That was prompted because, like I said, I think I had said my father had been a naval officer during World War II, and I always thought Navy, Navy, Navy until I met Staff Sergeant Lowell Thomas. And he convinced me in about 45 minutes I should join the Air Force. But no, I'm happy, I'm thrilled that men and women are serving today, and I'm happy that there's no draft. I don't like the idea of having to draft men and women. I want men and women in there who want to be part of it, and if we could keep it like that and enough of men and women want to serve, I think we're in a better place. That's about it.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the service of our country.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you.